The message was never meant to be a request for help. It was a farewell. The ship drifted at the edge of known space, its hull scarred by years of neglect and denial. Inside, representatives of 6 different species sat in silence, each bound by the same sentence the galaxy had passed on them: expelled. Their star charts had been wiped, their trade codes revoked. Their access to jump gates terminated. Officially, they no longer existed. The galaxy called it cultural incompatibility, a clean phrase that hid the truth. They were too slow to adapt, too strange to trust, too inefficient to keep. The great councils had voted, as they always did, with numbers and convenience instead of mercy. Now their fuel was low, their food rationed, and their future empty. The broadcast they prepared was not a plea. Pride still mattered, even at the end. It was a record: who they were, where they came from, and how the galaxy had decided they were no longer worth the effort. The signal would scatter into the void, archived by automated probes, maybe found centuries later by historians who would shake their heads and move on. No one expected an answer. The transmission ended and silence returned. Hours passed, then days. On the 4th day, the sensors detected something impossible: a reply. The signal was messy, filled with background noise and overlapping frequencies. It didn't follow standard galactic protocol. At first, the translators failed completely. The crew assumed it was a malfunction or an echo. Then the system stabilized. "Unknown vessel," the message said. "This is the human exploration ship Solace. We received your broadcast. We are changing course to meet you. They may be scavengers." When the human ship emerged from fold space, it did not look like a predator. It was large but not aggressive in shape. Its hull bore scars, but they were repaired, not hidden. External lights blinked in visible patterns, not tactical signals, but something almost decorative. Most strange of all, its weapons ports remained closed. Another message came through, clearer this time. "We don't know the full story," the human voice said, "but we know what it sounds like when someone is being left behind. You are not trespassing. You are not under arrest. We're here to talk if you're willing." The first meeting happened in neutral space, inside a shared docking ring extended between the 2 vessels. The expelled delegation arrived prepared for hostility, guarded by armed escorts who looked more ceremonial than effective. The humans arrived with no visible weapons. They came in varied shapes and sizes, wrapped in simple uniforms marked only with a blue and white symbol. Their faces were expressive in ways the galaxy often found uncomfortable: eyes too direct, posture too open. The human leader introduced herself plainly: "Commander Elena Ruiz, Exploration and Contact Division." They spoke of denied ports, frozen accounts, ships turned away even in emergencies. They expected arguments, negotiations, conditions. Ruiz asked questions instead. "How many ships do you have left? Why are you doing this? We can't overturn the Council's decision. We don't have that authority, but we can offer something else." Ruiz met their gaze without flinching. "Honesty, cooperation, and time. If this doesn't work, you're free to leave." Along the way, the expelled ships were escorted, refueled, and repaired without invoices or contracts. Human engineers worked alongside alien technicians, asking questions instead of issuing commands. No one demanded cultural changes. No one forced protocols. When they arrived, what awaited them was not a prison or a controlled habitat. It was a cluster of stations and orbital habitats buzzing with movement. Ships of different designs moved freely. Languages overlapped in open channels. It was chaotic but alive. The expelled species were assigned sectors suited to their needs. Atmospheric adjustments were made, gravity fields tuned, food synthesis adapted. The galaxy watched from a distance. Analysts dismissed it as sentimentality, a waste of resources, humans playing savior to earn reputation points. They were wrong. Inside human space, something different was happening. The newcomers were not treated as burdens. They were invited to contribute. One species helped stabilize aging life support systems with techniques the humans hadn't considered. Another redesigned microreactors to be more efficient under stress. Another assisted in long-term habitat planning, thinking in timeframes humans rarely did. Humans noticed. They learned quickly. They shared faster. Where the galaxy categorized and restricted, humanity experimented. And in quiet rooms far from the council chambers, strategic observers began to feel unease. Because the expelled species were no longer drifting. They were building, and humanity was building with them. Far from the stars that had turned their backs, a new story had begun, one the galaxy had never voted on and could no longer ignore. Human space did not feel like exile. That was the first thought many of the newcomers shared, though none said it aloud at first. They had expected strict rules, guarded zones, and quiet suspicion. Instead, they found noise, motion, and constant activity. Stations hummed with repair crews, traders argued openly over prices, and ships arrived and departed without ceremony. It felt unfinished, always changing. To species raised under rigid galactic order, the chaos was unsettling, but it was honest. The first weeks were difficult. Differences in biology caused problems no database had predicted. Air mixtures had to be adjusted daily. Light cycles confused circadian rhythms. Even sound carried differently through shared corridors. Humans adapted quickly, but not perfectly. Mistakes happened. Apologies followed. Corrections were made. No one pretended it was easy. What surprised the newcomers most was how often humans asked for help. When a power fluctuation threatened one of the outer habitats, human engineers did not isolate the area and solve it alone. They invited specialists from the expelled species who had managed fragile systems under scarcity for generations. The solution they offered was simple and efficient, using fewer materials and less energy than human designs. The fix spread across the network within days. Credit was given publicly. This unsettled the galactic observers more than any weapon display could have. In the wider galaxy, knowledge was controlled. Innovations were owned, patented, restricted. Sharing was done carefully and only with equals. Humanity ignored this tradition completely. They documented everything and made it available to anyone working on the problem. Some called it reckless. Others quietly copied the results. As months passed, the newcomers stopped thinking of themselves as guests. They began to think of themselves as neighbors. Children, human and alien, shared learning spaces, curious rather than fearful. Language barriers softened as shared slang developed, rough but effective. There were conflicts. Disagreements over space usage, arguments over resource priority. Humans argued loudly, then moved on. The expelled species learned that raised voices did not always mean violence was coming. Sometimes it just meant honesty. Still, not everyone trusted the situation. In the high council chambers of the dominant galactic powers, concern hardened into strategy. Humanity's alliance with the expelled species was labeled destabilizing. Trade sanctions were discussed. Access restrictions proposed. Not yet enforced, but prepared. They expected humanity to fold. Humans did not. Instead, shipping routes were quietly adjusted. New supply chains formed, smaller but more flexible. Where official jump gates were denied, humans relied on experimental drives and unconventional paths. It was slower, riskier, and often inefficient. But it worked. The expelled species watched closely. This kind of stubborn adaptability was familiar to them. It reminded them of how they had survived before the galaxy had turned away. One evening cycle, Commander Ruiz stood in a shared observation deck, looking out at the dense cluster of stations. A representative from one of the expelled species stood beside her. His people had once been masters of long-term planning, thinking in centuries instead of years. "You are changing," he said. Ruiz smiled faintly. "So are you." Political factions argued that humanity was overreaching, risking survival for idealism. The debate was loud, public, and often uncomfortable. The expelled species watched this too, expecting a familiar pattern. In the galaxy, they knew such debates ended with quiet decisions made behind closed doors. Humanity argued in the open. Votes were held. Policies adjusted. Support remained. Not unanimous, but strong enough. That strength did not go unnoticed. The first sanction hit without warning. A major trade hub closed its gates to human ships. Financial systems flagged shared accounts. Official statements cited security concerns and unregulated integration. Smaller, less efficient, but free of council oversight. The expelled species contributed methods for decentralized trade, learned from generations of operating outside main systems. What the galaxy intended as punishment became a lesson. Each restriction forced innovation. Each blockade revealed new paths. Humanity's infrastructure grew less centralized, harder to pressure. Their allies became essential rather than dependent. Still, tension grew. One morning cycle, long-range sensors detected a coalition patrol fleet approaching human space. Not an invasion, but a statement. Weapons armed, communications silent. Fear spread through the habitats. The expelled species remembered this posture well. It was how compliance was enforced. Human command did not scramble fighters. They did not evacuate. Instead, they opened every channel. They broadcast everything. Civilian populations, shared habitats, mixed crews, human children learning alongside alien peers, engineers working together, farmers adjusting ecosystems with alien guidance. No speeches, no accusations, just reality. The patrol fleet halted at the boundary. Hours passed. Finally, a single transmission came through, cold and formal. You are violating established order. Redundant networks, distributed power, mobile habitats, evacuation plans that assumed cooperation rather than panic. The expelled species helped redesign everything. They were no longer just refugees, they were partners. One of the younger species, once dismissed as erratic, proposed a communication method resistant to jamming. Humans tested it. It worked. Another offered insights into social resilience under long-term pressure. Human planners listened. The galaxy had believed it was isolating weaknesses. Instead, it had concentrated strengths. Late one cycle, Ruiz reviewed reports from across the network. Growth was steady, integration improving, tension rising. She knew what was coming. The galaxy would not tolerate a successful alternative for long. But as she looked at the data, one truth stood out clearly. Humanity was no longer standing alone, and neither were the ones the galaxy had expelled. Together, they were becoming something the councils had never planned for, a living proof that survival did not require permission. And when the galaxy finally moved from warnings to force, it would face not scattered outcasts, but a united system built on shared defiance and earned trust. The next confrontation would not be about borders. It would be about whose idea of the future would endure. The pressure did not arrive all at once. It came in layers, quiet at first, then harder to ignore. Ships began reporting delays at neutral ports. Requests for spare parts were denied without explanation. Navigation data updates arrived incomplete. None of it was openly hostile, but the pattern was clear. The galaxy was tightening its grip, slowly, carefully, as if testing how much force was needed to make humanity bend. Inside human space, the response was calm but serious. Commanders, planners, engineers, and civilian leaders met together, not behind sealed doors but in shared forums. The expelled species were invited to every discussion. Their voices were not symbolic. Their experience mattered. They had lived through this before. One representative explained it simply. The galaxy does not strike until it is sure you cannot adapt. It prefers exhaustion to destruction. They suggested redundancies that seemed excessive to human planners at first. Then simulations proved them right. Every step made the alliance harder to isolate. The galaxy noticed. A formal declaration followed, broadcast across known space. It accused humanity of destabilizing galactic balance, of sheltering non-compliant elements, of encouraging disorder. It demanded the removal of the expelled species from human territory. Human leadership replied with a short message: no. Some companies pulled out unwilling to face pressure. Life inside human space grew more difficult. Energy shortages forced rationing in outer habitats. Transport delays stretched schedules. People worked longer hours. Tension rose. Arguments became sharper. Fear crept in. The expelled species watched carefully. They saw signs they recognized, the early cracks where unity could fail. They acted. Instead of withdrawing into their own communities, they stepped forward. They volunteered for difficult shifts, shared food reserves, took on dangerous repair work, not because they were asked to, but because they remembered what happened when fear turned inward. Humans noticed. Trust deepened. One incident nearly changed everything. A civilian transport ship, crewed by both humans and members of an expelled species, was stopped near the border by a coalition patrol. The patrol claimed a systems check. Hours passed. Communication was limited. Tension spread rapidly through human space. Fighters were placed on standby. The expelled species representatives urged patience. "This is provocation," one warned. "They want a reaction." The intimidation, the lack of cause, they added no commentary. The galaxy saw public reaction was mixed. Some supported the coalition's authority, others questioned it. Small protests appeared on neutral worlds. Quiet doubt spread. It was not enough to stop the pressure, but it slowed it. Behind the scenes, something else was happening. Joint research teams, human and alien, had been working on problems born of necessity. Energy efficiency, compact propulsion, resilient habitats. None of it was meant to be revolutionary. It became exactly that. One breakthrough involved an old alien concept the galaxy had dismissed as impractical. It relied on redundancy over precision, resilience over elegance. Humans adapted it with their own materials and methods. The result was a system that could operate under conditions most galactic tech could not. It spread quickly. Another team developed a communication mesh that rerouted itself instantly when disrupted. Jamming became nearly useless. None of this violated any galactic law directly, but it made enforcement harder. As months turned into a year, human space did not collapse. It stabilized. The expelled species no longer spoke of return. Their children spoke human languages with ease. Humans adopted alien customs without thinking. Shared holidays formed, informal and spontaneous. The galaxy had expected division. Instead, it found cohesion. That frightened it. A second declaration followed, harsher than the first. It accused humanity of creating a rival power structure. It announced limited enforcement actions to preserve stability. The expelled species stood beside human commanders on every deck. When the first enforcement fleet crossed the boundary, it found no targets, only empty space and watching eyes. Supply lines stretched thin. Coalition commanders grew frustrated. Orders conflicted. Local authority clashed with central command. Humans exploited none of this aggressively. They waited. The expelled species understood this tactic well. Pressure without release weakens the hand that applies it. Meanwhile, messages arrived quietly from neutral systems. Requests for information, for trade, for access to human-alien designs. Some were cautious, some desperate. Humanity responded selectively, openly. No exclusivity, no hidden clauses. The alliance grew, not in territory, but in influence. By the time the galaxy realized the scale of what was happening, it was too late to reverse cleanly. Human space had become a hub, not because it demanded obedience, but because it offered participation. Inside one shared habitat, an elder from the expelled species stood watching children at play, human and alien together, arguing over rules of a game neither species had invented alone. He felt something unfamiliar, not safety, belonging. He had once believed survival meant endurance. Humanity had taught him it could mean connection. Far away, in chambers built for control, leaders studied reports with rising unease. Every attempt to isolate humanity made it stronger. Every threat pushed others closer to it. The galaxy had expelled weakness, but it had underestimated what happens when those cast out are given a place to stand. And as fleets drifted in costly stalemates and influence quietly shifted, one truth became unavoidable. This was no longer a problem that could be solved with pressure alone. The next step would demand a choice the galaxy had avoided for generations: adapt. It did not come as an announcement or a vote broadcast. It came as movement. Fleets that had once hovered at the edges of human space now advanced with purpose. Not all at once, not in one overwhelming wave, but enough to send a clear message. This was no longer pressure. It was enforcement. Inside human territory, there was no panic. There was urgency, yes, there was fear. But there was also preparation. For years now, humanity and the expelled species had planned for this moment. Not in secret, not as a conspiracy, but as a shared understanding. The galaxy would not accept change unless it was forced to see it. And even then, it might choose violence over adaptation. So humanity prepared to endure. Civilian populations were moved first. Mobile habitats separated and drifted along pre-planned routes. Supply depots unlocked and redistributed automatically. Communication networks shifted into emergency configuration, overlapping and self-healing. There was no single command center to strike. The expelled species played a critical role. They had lived through collapse before. They knew which systems failed first under stress, not because they were weak, but because they were trusted too much. So nothing was trusted alone. When the first coalition fleet crossed the boundary, it encountered resistance, but not the kind it expected. There were no opening attacks. Instead, the fleet found space that refused to behave as predicted. Navigation data lagged. Sensor returns conflicted. Targets appeared, vanished, and reappeared elsewhere. It was not deception. It was complexity. Human and alien engineers had redesigned space traffic itself, filling it with moving platforms, signal noise, and constantly shifting civilian infrastructure. Every potential strike risked collateral damage the coalition could not justify publicly. Orders stalled. Commanders argued. Back in human space, people watched the situation unfold in real time. There were no attempts to hide the danger. Humanity did not shield its citizens from fear. It explained the risks, the plans, and the limits. The expelled species noticed this too. In the old galaxy, fear was hidden until it exploded. Here, it was shared and managed. As coalition fleets advanced cautiously, smaller incidents began to occur. Patrol ships lost contact. Drones malfunctioned. Supply vessels found themselves rerouted by automated traffic systems they did not control. Nothing was destroyed, nothing was seized, but the cost of presence rose sharply. Coalition leaders demanded escalation. Human command refused to respond in kind. Instead, they did something unexpected. They opened their borders wider, not physically but informationally. Every system design, every survival method, every cooperative framework developed by humans and their allies was released publicly. Not sold, not restricted, shared. It was a dangerous move. Within days, neutral worlds began adopting the designs. Small powers improved their infrastructure. Marginal systems found ways to resist pressure quietly. The galaxy's centralized control weakened. The coalition accused humanity of inciting rebellion. Human leadership replied with calm honesty. "We are not telling anyone to resist you. We are showing them how to survive without asking permission." The expelled species felt something shift. For the first time, they were not reacting to the galaxy's actions. They were shaping events. Still, the coalition would not retreat easily. A decisive move was planned. A large task force would advance directly toward one of the major shared habitats, a symbol, not a military target. The intent was clear: force humanity to either defend it violently or abandon it publicly. Inside the habitat, evacuation began immediately. Humans and aliens worked side by side, guiding civilians to transport hubs. There was no chaos. Children were carried, elders supported. Pets and personal items were brought along when possible. Nothing was rushed, but nothing was delayed. As the last transports departed, a small group remained behind. Engineers, observers, and representatives from the expelled species. They wanted to be seen. When the coalition fleet arrived, they found the habitat still powered, still transmitting. No weapons active, no shields raised. A message was sent. "This station is civilian. There are no combat assets present. If you fire, the galaxy will see exactly what you choose to destroy." The coalition could still apply force, but it could no longer control the story. Inside human space, relief spread, but no celebration followed. Humanity understood this was not victory, it was a pause, and pauses were dangerous. In the days that followed, cracks began to appear within the coalition itself. Smaller powers questioned their role, trade partners complained about losses. Citizens protested enforcement actions that now looked less like stability and more like cruelty. The expelled species received messages from places they had once called home. Quiet apologies, careful questions, regret that came too late but still mattered. Human leadership debated the next step. Some argued it was time to push harder, to demand recognition, to formalize the alliance into a competing bloc. Others urged restraint. Commander Ruiz listened to all of it. Then she spoke. "If we become what we're resisting, we lose what makes this work. We don't need to replace the galaxy's order. We need to outgrow it." The old system worked only when everyone believed there was no alternative. Now there was one, not built on dominance, not enforced by threat, but held together by shared survival and chosen loyalty. The expelled species stood at the center of this change, not as victims, not as symbols, but as proof. Proof that those cast out were not broken. Proof that the galaxy's judgments were not final. Far away, council chambers filled with arguments that no longer followed old lines. Adaptation versus control, cooperation versus authority. The choice loomed. And this time, delay would not save them, because humanity was no longer asking for space. It was already living in the future. And the galaxy would either learn to live with it. It did not. Instead, it ended with exhaustion. Coalition fleets remained deployed far longer than planned. Supply costs grew. Crews rotated too often. Morale dropped. Commanders struggled to justify missions that produced no victories and no clear objectives. They were not losing ships, but they were losing certainty. Meanwhile, human space continued to function. Not perfectly, not comfortably. But steadily, trade adapted. Education continued. Habitats expanded slowly but safely. Humans and the expelled species worked side by side, no longer thinking in terms of us and them. The distinction had faded through shared work and shared risk. Children born during the early days of integration grew up seeing mixed crews as normal. They learned stories from both sides. To them, the idea that the galaxy had once voted entire species into exile felt distant and strange. Inside the coalition, disagreement finally reached a breaking point. Several member powers formally withdrew from enforcement actions. They did not join humanity. They did not openly oppose the coalition. They simply stopped participating. Their leaders cited economic strain, political unrest, and lack of public support. The coalition tried to hide it. Humanity did not comment. Instead, human networks quietly adjusted access permissions, allowing trade and information to flow more freely to those systems. No announcements, no rewards, just connection. The effect was immediate. Other systems noticed. Requests arrived daily now. Not demands, questions, proposals, observers asking to study human-alien infrastructure, delegations asking how integration was managed without collapse. Human leadership responded carefully. They did not claim superiority. They did not frame their model as the only answer. They spoke honestly. "This works for us," they said, "because we chose it together." Recognize the human-led alliance as a legitimate autonomous entity or escalate enforcement. The debate was long. Old arguments were repeated, warnings about disorder, fear of precedent, claims that control was necessary for stability. Then a voice spoke from the observers' gallery. It was one of the species once expelled. Permission to speak had not been granted. No one stopped him. "We were called incompatible," he said. "Unstable, a threat to order, but the truth is simpler. We were inconvenient. We asked for room to exist on our own terms, and the galaxy refused." Too many delegates realized that escalation would not restore control. It would only confirm what was already obvious. The galaxy could no longer force everyone to live by one design. Within months, coalition fleets withdrew, not in defeat, in acceptance. Sanctions quietly expired. Trade restrictions softened. Official language shifted from condemnation to caution, then slowly to neutrality. Human space was no longer treated as a problem to be solved. It was treated as a fact. Years passed. The alliance grew not by conquest but by invitation. Some species joined fully, others partnered loosely. Some simply borrowed ideas and returned home changed. Humanity did not chase them. They had learned something important early on. A system that must be enforced will always break. A system that people choose will endure. Commander Ruiz retired quietly. There were no statues, no great ceremonies. She spent her days walking through shared habitats, watching markets where human foods mixed with alien designs, listening to languages blend into something new. She once met an elder from the first expelled fleet again, now old even by his people's standards. "The galaxy finally adapted," he said. She shook her head. "No, it stopped pretending it didn't have to." And humanity had learned something too, that welcoming the unwanted was not an act of kindness alone. It was an act of strength. Because those who survive being cast out know how to endure, how to rebuild, how to adapt when rules fail. By standing with them, humanity had changed more than a political balance. It had changed what the galaxy believed was possible. Long after the votes and fleets were forgotten, historians would argue about when the shift truly began. Some would point to council debates, others to trade realignments. But among humans and their allies, the answer was simpler. It began the moment a drifting ship sent a farewell into the dark. And through that door, the future walked in. The galaxy expelled them, but humanity welcomed them. HFY